live at 5. Hello and welcome to the hour.
It's a big day, Stephen. The young one has become the old one. Cliff Richard, he's 70 today.
I can't believe it, 70 years of age.
Yeah, he is, he's 70. And the man still wears terry towel and shoes.
Is that proven? Is that just a rumour? Is that one of your rumours?
My friend said that she saw a picture of him wearing terry towel and shoes, so it must be true.
He's having a curry for his birthday tonight, so happy birthday.
He's having a curry, lovely.
He's having a right. Here's what's coming up on the hour tonight.
We meet a family man whose life was saved by an emergency organ donation. And we're all about the apples as Pete the gardener presses his own cider. And the apple doctor Max Coleman is here with a taste for the homegrown varieties. Plus, we meet another ordinary man who leads an extraordinary double life.
All that's still to come tonight, but first up this evening, you can't have escaped the story of the 33 Chilean miners who were lifted to safety. Incredible scenes of celebration over the past 24 hours or so.
It's been amazing. There's been wall-to-wall coverage on all the news channels, and it's across all the front pages of today's papers.
Like many people, I stayed up until 2 o'clock in the morning, kind of regretting it now, but you couldn't get away from that story, which has captured the attention of the whole world.
But the big question now isn't just about the physical health, but also the mental health of the miners and how they now cope with the trauma that they've been through.
Well, Psychiatrist Dr Alex Yellowlees joins us in the studio to talk about the impact post-traumatic stress disorder can have on people in this type of situation. Alex, thanks for coming in. Good to see you as always. We've seen today a medical briefing this afternoon. The men are all in good physical shape. What's going on mentally with them, though?
Well, I think these guys have gone to hell and back, haven't they, in many respects, and having had the acute stress response that they'll have had when the tragedy struck and they really realised they were trapped and they were surrounded by panic, these fellas will have gone through several days of being completely disorganised and in utter panic and fear for their lives. And then they'll have moved into a phase when they'll have started to reorganise themselves and mobilise themselves in a productive way. But now the big concern is that they're rescued. How are they going to cope emotionally and mentally? Most probably will just need to reconnect with their families and will move on with their lives gradually and heal, as it were. But there'll be a proportion who will struggle, who may develop what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, which can be a very, very disabling condition when people relive the trauma as if it was happening afresh in the moment. And that can happen over and over again and sometimes ruin people's lives.
It must be quite difficult to pinpoint when this will actually happen, this post-traumatic stress disorder, because for some people I suppose it might happen immediately, but for others it can occur, you know, years or a year or two later.
Absolutely, and not everybody's going to get that, and not everybody needs specialist help afterwards. Some people just need to get on with their lives and reconnect with their families, but a proportion will struggle. Some may get clinically depressed, some may develop PTSD, and it's really important that those people are identified and offered the right kind of help that will enable them to recover, because it's very treatable.
I remember my grandfather fought in the war but never talked about his experiences and the trauma that he went through, because you weren't encouraged to then. Now it's all about talking about your experiences. Is that really the best way forward for them?
Not necessarily. I think there is a belief that everybody who's been through a trauma needs to have counselling. That's not necessarily the case, and there's some evidence that if you get in there and try and counsel people too early, it's not helpful for them. Some will want to talk about it, and it's important they're offered the opportunity, but they're respected in terms of their wish to pick that up or not. What is critical probably is following these people up for long enough to identify that ones that at a later date and maybe after a year or even more begin to struggle and have symptoms from kind of a delayed form, if you like, of PTSD.
What I found really interesting, Alex, and just picking up on something you mentioned earlier, was that first initial 17 days. Because you're right, when those miners first realised there is no way we're getting out of here, no one knows we're here, you would have thought that fighting would have broke out, you know, panic, but the men seem to have organised themselves immediately. They elected a leader, they had a medical person there, and they said, you know, like Stephen, I watched a lot of the coverage, that's what kept that mental strength, kept them alive for those 17 days.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, these guys are a remarkable bunch of men, aren't they? Because they did assemble themselves, they did reorganise, they got order out of the chaos, and the other great thing is that they were able to get communication with their families. They were able to keep contact with them. They had light which must have been a wonderful thing when they were able to come out the darkness down there. It must have been fantastic. So that these men have obviously got a story to tell, and it will be amazing to see what comes out of this when we get the full insight into how they actually managed themselves, how they dealt with those that were struggling, who came to the fore. And it's a whole study in there, isn't there, of human survival.
Great case study for doctors, isn't it? So what are the warning signs that the doctors will be looking out for with them over the course of the next year, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, warning signs would be people becoming increasingly anxious, never really settling back to being their normal, relaxed self. Other signs would be somebody developing panic attacks or anxiety attacks. Other indications would be if somebody begins to relive some of the traumatic times they went through. It may disturb their sleep. They might start having nightmares about it. Sometimes events and things that happen in people's lives will trigger off a flashback to an episode that happened down the mine, for example. And that could start at quite a late stage. And therefore it's important that family and the medical teams that are following these people up are vigilant to that fact.
And what treatment or help will be available? I mean, I know they're in Chile, but what help and treatment is available in this country for post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, it's great. If it's clearly identified and diagnosed, there's really good treatments for it in terms of forms of cognitive behavioural therapy and psychological therapy that really help. There's also medications that work extremely well. And there's a technique which is to do with rapid eye movement desensitization. It sounds like a long phrase, but it's a wonderful, simple technique which actually reprograms the parts of the brain and the mind that have recorded the traumatic memories.
Wow.
In other words, it's like taking out a piece of dysfunctional software and reinstalling something more functional. It works at that kind of level. It's very straightforward to do and is incredibly effective.
The inquest into the 7/7 bombings in London has been talking about this and the after effects for people, but what are the kind of everyday life events that can sometimes bring this on for all of us?
I mean, it could be a simple thing like they're in a lift, for example, in the future, with this group of guys, and they suddenly have a re-experiencing of being down the mine. That kind of thing would be an obvious link. It could be that maybe they're in a room and the lights go out, the light fuse blows or whatever, and they're suddenly plunged into darkness. Because those kinds of things would have occurred.
Just the triggers you spoke about?
These are the kind of triggers. But for us, I mean, anything essentially that a person perceives as being really traumatic, especially if they feel that their life might be at risk, can trigger off PTSD. So it's not always to do with the obvious extent of the trauma. It's really more to do with how that person perceives their level of threat.
Well, fingers crossed. I mean, we have been hooked on the TV screens
Sure
the last few days.
Yeah.
We wish them all the best of luck. Alex, thank you very much for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you,
Alex. Thank you. If you want to know more about dealing with trauma, or you know someone who has been affected by it and you're interested in what Alex has been talking about there, go to our website, stv.tv/there. Follow the links and you can get much more information there.
Okay, now as we head towards National Apple Day this coming Sunday, we're going apple daft here on the hour.